Diamond Jubilee celebration events. This session is titled Inspiring Clinician Scientists. What does it take to succeed? And is a focused discussion really on how to grow and sustain research in St. John's. This session is jointly organized by the Diamond Jubilee Organizing Committee and the PhD Committee. Thank you one and all for being part of this session, and a very big thank you to all the faculty who have traveled from near and far to participate in this session. To give you a brief overview of the session today, I invite Dr. Sucharita, Head of Physiology and the PhD Committee, to give you a brief overview and orient us to what we are planned for today.
Thank you, Dr. Priya. A very warm welcome to all the distinguished speakers and participants. It gives me immense pleasure to have got an opportunity to stand in front of you to welcome everyone to this much awaited first Diamond Jubilee academic event. This event would not have been possible without the support of esteemed speakers who agreed to be part of this program, and also a great response with a lot of registrar participants. This event, I feel, is a once-in-a-lifetime event for all of us, as we are going to hear the alumni who are pioneers in their own respective fields and to have agreed to come and be part of this program. I'm here to briefly talk about three things. Why are we conducting this program? What is going to be done during this program? And finally, what is the way forward after this program?
Let's make a new cylinder.
Let me first start why this event was thought about. As all of us are aware that NIRF ranking of the institute has dropped, so is the reduced status of the PhD program, and the number of publication of the faculty or the quality of publication per faculty has reduced, which has become a point of concern. All of us will agree that while the problem remains complex, the solutions cannot be simple. But the way forward to dealing with these concerns is engaging with repeated discussions and also having some action plans. Current event is an attempt in this direction, and it is very important to ask a simple question: what can be done at individual level while we are seeking support from the institution? As they say, small steps can bring bigger changes. We hope that the current program will be able to sensitize faculty about the various processes involved to being a clinical scientist. So coming to the next part, what are we going to do today? We have planned 3 amazing sessions. The first session is all about listening to the alumni who is going to share their experiences with us. The second session is planned for a panel discussion, which is going to bring about the various concerns which I just now listed, and hopefully we will be able to figure out some solutions. And third session, we have called it Meeting the Professor session, where we hope that all of you will get a chance to interact one-to-one and clear whatever doubts you have. Now, the big question all of us will have in mind is, what is the way forward? We hope that this program will sensitize and create interest in faculty to explore various avenues, while at institutional level, opportunities are being considered to facilitate collaborations, fellowships, PhD program, and of course some few training programs. We will be updating you as and when these events on a timely basis. Once again, with immense pleasure, I welcome all of you, and I'm very sure that this is going to be a very fruitful day ahead. Now, I kindly request Reverend Father Dr. Charles Davis Associate Director, St. John's Medical College and St. John's Research Institute, and Dr. Tony Raj, Professor, Department of Physiology, Dean, St. John's Research Institute, to come up on stage and chair the first session. While I invite them, I'll also ask Dr. Priya to introduce the speakers. Thank you.
Welcome and good morning, Father Charles. Good morning, Dr. Tony. So, this is a session where we are not going to discuss detailed introductions in the interests of time, but as Dr. Sucharita mentioned, we have prepared a folder with everybody's detailed CVs, which have been shared with all the participants in advance. So I would like to invite the following faculty up on stage. Dr. Prem Pais, as you all know, was the Dean of St. John's Medical College from 2004 to 2013, and he founded and headed the Division of Clinical Research and Training for more than a decade. Dr. Chitranjan Andrade, welcome sir, is Senior Professor of Clinical Psychopharmacology and Neurotoxicology in NIMHANS, and of course has been both the Dean and Director there. Professor Christopher Matthias is joining us online. Professor is, I think, the first Rhodes Scholar from St. John's, and is Professor of Neurovascular Medicine in the University of London and Professor Emeritus at University College London. Professor Patrick Kamath, do join us, sir. Is Professor of Medicine and Consultant in Gastroenterology and Hepatology in the Mayo Clinic, College of Medicine and Science. And Professor Venkat Narayan is Executive Director, Emory Global Diabetes Research Center. Professor Venkat will be the first to speak and will be joining us online via Zoom. And we are very grateful for your willingness to participate at a very early time in your morning. So over to you, Professor Venkat.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you, Sucharita. It's a pleasure for me to attend this. It feels a little like being on night on call, but I gave up clinical medicine to avoid being night on call. But this is a pleasure. This is a kind of night on call I relish doing, and thank you all very much. And thank you for accommodating and letting me go first. I'd like to listen to the others too. So what I'll try to do is take 10 minutes to try to reflect upon my journey and some of the lessons that I might have learned. And I want to be very clear. These lessons are personal lessons and they may not be generalizable. But I'd like to share with you that over the course of my journey, there are a few ideas that have stuck very clearly in my head, and I want to start off with those ideas. The first is that everything seems to make sense backwards. We all talk of planning a career, but it seldom works that way. What really happens is that you develop a philosophy in life, and then looking back, the things that you do seem to connect, the dots connect backwards. I mean, that's been at least my personal kind of experience. And the second very important principle as a scientist or as a human being is we have to try to follow our interest and our passion. And when it comes to science, it really is about following the question rather than following your specialty or following your discipline, etc. And which really means that you're constantly redefining yourself, coming up with surprises, but still you're navigating the future in a manner that is very consistent with the question you're pursuing. Like, for example, I might have started as an epidemiologist, but might now be a bench scientist because of the type of question and the disciplines I want to pursue. Thirdly, it is extremely important, in my personal opinion, to stay agnostic and skeptical with a sense of optimism so that we can maintain a level of energy to, to pursue what we want to do. What this really means is the ability to challenge norms. Many years ago, I read a preface of Julian Hart's textbook of cardiology, where he basically said 50% of medicine changes every 5 years. We don't know which 50%. And in today's, the rate of scientific progress, that 50% probably changes every 2 years. When I reflect back on my time at St. John's, we were taught that large populations were necessarily bad. And whereas now I think now the frame of demography has shifted. We treated myocardial infarctions by asking people to rest for 6 weeks. We would never do that today. We treated peptic ulcer with milk drips. So when you look back, many of the questions and answers we provided to pass exams have been revolutionized and were potentially wrong. So this makes me wonder whether an education should be entirely fact-based or should be based more on inquiry, on discovery, etc. The next important principle that has come to me over time is, yes, we have to somehow find a path of interest and identify a focus where we maintain our interest, at least for a certain period of our life. But it's equally important to be developing a broad interest so that, as you think in terms of the major problems that need to be solved today, they require interdisciplinary work. They require appreciation of the sciences, the arts and humanities, engineering, and medicine, which means that we are going to be working with geneticists and epidemiologists, sociologists and anthropologists. You're going to be working with the statisticians. You're going to be working with the physicists and the informaticians, etc. So an awareness of many of those fields and an idea of being curious about other areas is going to be extremely important. And finally, another big lesson that I'd like to share with you is the importance. We are talking about how do we succeed, but I believe to succeed, we should learn to celebrate failures. Think about it. We do research to find out things that we don't know about. And by definition, that journey is bound to have failures. In fact, some of the greatest research has begun with major failures. I mean, there's a great book called, the Paradigm Shift. Essentially, a lot of major scientific discoveries happen by chance, by some of the failures in a lab method, by certain failures in our observations or new observations. So I think we constantly need to be aware of that. But what that requires is an ability to maintain an open mind, pursue our curiosity with a sense of openness, but also develop a certain discipline to remain organized and publish. So with that background, let me very briefly, in the next 5 minutes, share with you my own personal journey. When I look across the panel of colleagues who are sharing today's podium with me, in a way, many of them were stars and some of the best students in the class, probably the toppers in their classes. In that sense, I was a little different. I wasn't exactly a good student when I was at St. John's, and I've often wondered, was I not smart enough to be in that system? Or is it possible that the system wasn't smart enough for me? I don't know the answer. But what is important to me is, regardless of what happened there, my time at St. John's, I generally spent time reading around philosophy and literature, reading about religions, taking part in poetry, being in the chess team. I enjoyed many of the extracurricular things that, looking back, has given me a kind of liberal education to engage in the kind of work I do. And it's also true that regardless of what happened at St. John's to me, over time, it has helped me craft a wonderful career and a very exciting life as a scientist and as a general advocate for public health, etc. When I finished my medical degree at St. John's, I was at many times wanting to quit medicine. And even when I finished medicine, I got admitted to a PhD in biomedical engineering at the Indian Institute of Science. I thought of doing an MA literature at Central College, and I didn't do any of those. I ended up moving to the United Arab Emirates, where I spent about 2 years as a primary care physician. I got fired from my job for a variety of reasons, regardless. Then I moved to England, where I was an SHO in medicine near Essex, and then moved on to become a registrar in medicine in Newcastle and Durham. And this was a very interesting period. So I was beginning to enjoy clinical medicine tremendously, and even considered becoming a gastroenterologist because I had started doing my own endoscopy list, etc. But then there was a restlessness within me. There was something that was not fulfilling just being a clinician, which was when I was on call one night in November of 1985 when an epiphany happened. I could not sleep, something like this. I had to wake up in the morning to attend to a call. I go to the library and I find this green book in the library called Clinical Epidemiology by Fletcher and Fletcher. I start reading the book. The very first paragraph of the book talks about retrosternal chest pain radiating down the arm. And the question is, what is the diagnosis? Anybody would say it's angina or it's myocardial infarction. But then the author pauses and says, how did they first know that this syndrome complex predicts myocardial infarction or angina? That was a question that I had asked Dr. Balasundaram when I was a medical student, and I was told, go read a book. So this idea, so I sat that morning, read that entire textbook of clinical epidemiology, and by 6:30 that morning, I had decided this was a field I wanted to pursue. So in the next couple of days, I reached out to the British Medical Journal, found positions for training in preventive medicine. They called it public health medicine at that time. And I matched in an elite program in Scotland, got to do an MSc in epidemiology and an MBA as a senior registrar, and then later became a consultant and senior lecturer in Aberdeen, in 1989, and started work largely in cardiovascular epidemiology and health promotion for cardiovascular disease. And I did not realize that one day a fellow in endocrinology comes to me and says, can you help me with some statistical analysis? I have this data set of 5,000 patients with diabetes. So we worked together on the problem and we published that paper. It got published in Diabetic Medicine. But little did I realize that that was an important finding. And the finding was very simple. You're talking way back in late 1980s, demonstrating probably for the first time almost that the major cause of death in people with diabetes was cardiovascular disease and not metabolic complications. So one thing led to another. That got me invited to a very important 2-week course in Cambridge. It's an international course in diabetes that is held every few years by elite international faculty. I was already a consultant, senior lecturer. We had bought a house in the countryside in Scotland. My wife had settled down. We thought we were going to live in Scotland for the rest of our life. This was in 1990. So I go to this course in diabetes research in Cambridge, 2 phenomenal weeks there. Get to meet some of the best people in the field of diabetes. And being a provocative person, I engaged in the discussion of how do you design studies, how do you design a trial, etc. Came up with a small group working on a design for a diabetes prevention trial. At the end of the 2 weeks, I came back to Aberdeen, thought I was going to be there forever. And then I get this letter from Dr. Peter Bennett at the NIH asking if I would want to go and spend a couple of years as a senior research fellow helping design this trial, which I did. And I resigned my job as a consultant in Scotland, moved to the NIH in the US, worked with the Pima Indian study, which gave me a tremendous 4 years of experience, connecting all the way from molecular biology to epidemiology and that connection in between. And I was able to design the first trial in that population, which eventually became what is known as the Diabetes Prevention Program, a $160 million, 27-center clinical trial. That began to launch my career, got recruited to CDC, to start the science branch. I mean, there was already a science branch there, but I had to play a role in terms of building it up. So at CDC, I had 10 tremendous years, actually there applying a lot of my MBA education and my epidemiology to reframe how you measure quality of care at a national and local level, and how that data can be used to change health policy and do trials of quality improvements. And we invented almost a discipline called translational research, writing conceptual papers, borrowing heavily from my management education, borrowing heavily from marketing principles, borrowing heavily from economics. So I think, in many ways, some of the other things that I had read for personal interest became very valuable. And I thought, here, I'm in a permanent job at CDC, I'm going to stay there forever. And then, lo and behold, Emory University approached me in 2006, asking if I would be interested in joining them to start a global program in diabetes and non-communicable diseases. I had not worked in US academia, never written a grant, never supervised a PhD student. And I was the only recruit into the space. As a single faculty, I took on the challenge in 2007. But over the last 15 years, we have developed the Emory Global Diabetes Research Center, which got established as a university-level center, the first university-level center that Emory has established since 1937. We are 150 or 160 faculty working in 22 countries. And more importantly, the journey has taught me a lot of humility. I set out believing initially that all that we learned in high-income countries could be applied to low and middle-income countries, but that's clearly not the case. We ran into the idea of type 2 diabetes in thin people, which has opened an entire arena. I'm almost done. Which has opened an entire arena of looking at insulin deficient variety, etc. With that, let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Venkat, for your beautiful sharing of your journey. Now may I invite Dr. Matthias. He is sitting in London. It's at 5:40 a.m. there. May I invite Dr. Matthias to go ahead.
Thank you very much. I don't know whether you can see me clearly because I'm having problems with my mainframe computer, and I'm now on.
You are clear, yes. Yes, you are clear. Yeah.
Actually, do you mind if somebody else speaks? Because I need to sort out my computer. There's something amiss. Apologies over that. Could you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can hear you. If you want, we will move to the next speaker. We'll come back to you.
Yes, please. Would you mind? Because I think I need to close it down and start again.
Thank you.
There's something amiss with one of my computers. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Yeah. Now may I invite Dr. Prem Pais. Yeah.
Good morning. It's a privilege for me to be here talking in this session. And I think in some ways what I'm going to say perhaps will fit in with what Dr. Venkat had just said. I'm also going to tell you, I thought, the best way to talk about developing clinical researchers in St. John's is to tell you a bit of the story about how I became a clinical researcher in St. John's and what helped and what didn't help. I'm not going to go into the philosophy of research, which Dr. Venkat has really very nicely expounded, except to say that whenever you do research, you don't do research. You have something that you want answered, there's some question, there's some doubt that you want issued, you want an answer to, you have to chase that. So that is a given. Subsequently, what happens? So, I was a general clinician. I enjoyed clinical medicine as much as anyone else. I still do. And my story in clinical research started exactly in another jubilee of college 50 years ago, the Silver Jubilee. And it started with a mentor. I call him a mentor now. At that time, I didn't call him a mentor. He was another alumnus who came from a junior batch. And I knew he was a cardiologist. We took him around. We had just started a new CCU in the hospital. And I was quite proud of it. I showed it to him and all the patients. And he asked me, do you get a lot of MIs? I said, yeah, we do. And do you get young MIs? I said, yeah. So he said, why? So I don't know. I mean, that's how it is. So then he said, why don't we try and find out what are the risk factors? Why do Indians get heart attacks? Is there some special risk factor different from the West? In other words, he nudged me into doing research. Now, when that mentor nudges someone, they get nudged. It's very difficult not to get nudged. But he did, and I asked him various doubts that came into my mind when I thought about it. I said, that time there was no funding. How do I get funds? So he said, I will help you out. When I get funds for giving talks, I'll send the money to you. And he advised me throughout. So my journey into clinical research started with a mentor. And the question which was in my mind as well, as to why do so many Indians get myocardial infarction? So we started this. This was my first project. It was a case control study, which we did in our CCU. We took 200 patients, subsequently 300, who had an acute myocardial infarction, and matched them with an equal number of normal people, and looked at the difference in risk factors between these two groups. And how did I do it? I was in medicine at that time. I was in a medical unit 1, and I had to do it in my spare time between patients. And you know, St. John's, we had 3 units. So 2 days a week was relatively light. You had no OPD. It was not a post-OPD round, so you had time. And I had my colleagues in the unit who, I have to say, were very supportive. They always said, go ahead, we'll finish the round for you. So that is another requirement. You need other faculty who will support you and realize the importance of what you're doing. So with the funds that Salim Yusuf was my mentor, sent, I hired 1 research assistant, and the rest of the work was done by the nurses in the CCU. They helped us identify patients, they drew the blood samples, and they helped us fill in the forms. They were not paid, but every Christmas they got a watch, and at the end of 3 years they said, no more watches, please. And then we published the paper in the Lancet, and this was actually the first paper, very small, just a hypothesis generating paper, which said Indians have no different risk factors from anyone else in the world. The next step was that the same mentor invited me to spend a year with him in McMaster. He had moved from NIH to McMaster University, and I was there from 94 to 95, and for me, I think this made a major difference in what I learned and my knowledge and approach towards research. I did a 1-year course in health research methodology, for which this university is very famous, and I certainly learned a lot. But I think what I really learned there was by being thrown into the deep end of this center, which did remarkable, huge, large research projects, clinical trials, and other types of study. And I did everything from carrying a duty pager, phoning up investigators around the world, checking data for data quality, helping with the analysis, publishing papers. So this is what I think really taught me how to do research. And of course, I made lifelong friends whom I still keep. I returned to the college at the end of the year, and with the support of the then director and the dean, we set up what was called grandly the Clinical Epidemiology and Research Center. Basically, we were given 1 room in the college, I have to tell Father that, on the first floor, and the same place where the alumnus office is, and that still remains it, although I think they are struggling to hold on to that room now. We developed links with the ICMR, and we set up a 6-center ICMR task force study on the same pattern of what we did in our CCU. So what is the learning process from that? The learning process was how to learn multi-center studies, how to process blood, how to shift blood, and a very important thing, how to work with a government agency like ICMR, which is a skill in itself. Based on these 2 studies, in the meanwhile, in McMaster University, Salim and his group, with some input from me, expanded the same design to produce the Interheart study, which moved from 200 cases and controls to 12,000 cases and 12,000 controls, or that's about 25,000 people altogether, which until today is the defining paper which lays down that 90% of patients with myocardial infarction can be explained by common risk factors. And that has been the landmark. Further trials and studies have all been on how to reduce and address these risk factors. A little later on, we moved from observational trials or studies to interventional studies. The first we did was in 1999. It started called the CREATE trial. It was the first trial in cardiovascular disease done in India with a multi-center approach, the first large ones. We worked really from the ground up. I learned there, or we learned, how to work with multiple sites, not 6 sites of the ICMR study, but I don't recall how many, 20-odd sites that we had. 50 sites working together. We learned rules and regulations of the government, which we didn't know before, by sitting outside the office and talking to the clerks of the DCGI. We learned how to handle trial drugs, how to get permissions, how to store them, how to ship them. We ran large investigator meetings, how to monitor sites, design and analysis of trials, and I also learned there the importance of delegation. One person cannot do it all. So at about that time, I was joined by a younger colleague, Dr. Dennis Xavier, and that's how the work processed. So that's the other lesson one should learn. I move now from a little bit from purely personal to institutional. From the time of the Silver Jubilee, and especially when I was in McMaster, Salim is very fond of his alumni. As you know, he comes so frequently. So we used to talk, how can St. John's be different? Till 1990, it was the tertiary care hospital of Bangalore. It had the most advanced treatment. From 1990, corporate hospitals came with endless money. St. John's started to be left behind. So we said, research in a medical college in India is a unique concept. So we thought, well, that's how we thought of the idea of what is now called St. John's Research Institute. We thought of it as an independent unit within St. John's National Academy of Health Science, where research would be a priority, which would foster, nurture, and support researchers, and develop certain core research capacity by various like statistics, banking, biobanking, etc., which would be available not only to the research institute, but to the whole academy as such. It came about because we had very supportive at that time, both the dean and director. In fact, 2 directors, Father Percival Fernandez, and he changed, and the next was Father Cullum. Both of them were very supportive. They gave the land and the basic infrastructure like water and electricity. The buildings were built without any money from St. John's, the first buildings, because the first dean had very innovative methods to raise funds, and so the first set of buildings, which are all the buildings on that side of the road, were built entirely without any funding from the college. Sustainability of the institution was supposed to be by funds developed by research grants and donations, and research faculty and different research divisions, after an initial period of support, were expected to be self-supporting by research grants. The Research Institute started in 2002, and this building, the first building, that picture there, was completed in 2004. So what was the setup of the Research Institute? It had its own dean and administration. It reported to the director and to the governing board. The faculty who were appointed to the Research Institute had protected time to do research, and they were expected to do mostly research, and our hope was that they would get dual appointment with the college, particularly clinical staff who may want what you know in India as teaching experience, and therefore the institution would have 2 streams. The majority stream perhaps who would basically focus on clinical work, and another stream which would be allowed to focus on research. And that was not an idea just for the college, it was an idea, not just for the Research Institute, it for all the organizations on the campus. And this picture shows you what we hoped it would be. The college, hospital, nursing college, and the Research Institute all working together. Now when I think back, what helped me? What are the things that helped me in becoming perhaps grandly called a clinical researcher? It was the initial mentoring. It was a sabbatical with McMaster. And I have to say that it was my position when I came back as sequentially head of Department of Medicine, vice dean, and as dean, member of the governing board, because one always needs a champion. And there has to be somebody in an institution who is willing to push an agenda forward, otherwise it doesn't get done. And that person should be in a position who can make a difference. We were also very lucky at those days. Both the first two institution directors were very supportive. The first dean of the Research Institute really was very dynamic. We get continued till today help from the Salim's group of the PHRI, Population Health Research Institute. And in the Research Institute, we had freedom to act, use funds, and less red tape, and general enthusiasm towards research. As dean, perhaps one of the things I can consider that I did that would help research is that we started an individual, what shall I say, chat with every faculty member when they gave their annual report. And in that I made a point of asking them, what research project are you thinking of? When your next annual report comes, when you're sitting with us, can you tell me what you expect to be doing? It was just to raise issues. I don't think it made a dramatic change, but I think it focused people's mind on the possibility of doing research. We were able to relax rules, I thought, of what they call special casual leave, that is casual leave, special leave given for research and publication papers, and I was able to be a little loose on that so people could do more frequently. We tried to bring cross appointments between St. John's Medical College and the Research Institute, and it was always important in any institution to win the support of the decision makers, in this case, the executive committee and the governing board. So what are the barriers and concerns that one has to be wary of? Number one, in any institution, people change. And when new people come, they may have different priorities, and it has to be done. That's how an institution grows, by different people perhaps working in different directions, but one has to be aware that this could happen and deal with it. As the newer generations come, memory fades of the initial vision and struggles of setting up these particular organizations. Tension on ownership of funds. A research fund comes in to a particular researcher, but it comes into the institution. Whose money is it? Is it handled? Should the researcher be given more flexibility in the funds, or should the institution say this is institutional funds? These things need to be worked out and can always be worked out with proper communication and support. There's always a challenge. You know, our dream, as I said, was that St. John's Research Institute, St. John's Hospital, and the Medical College would work together as one unit. It's not quite happened as much as we would want, so there's always a risk of developing silos. I think I'll skip these. So what can we move forward? How can I suggest that we move forward? Such few suggestions that I have. Put forward adequate role models of people who are not only doing research, but people who are doing both, because we want people who are able to do both. Yes, more of research for some and more of clinical work for the other. The institution should recognize the achievements of people who do research by giving them academic rewards. For example, can we have an annual reward for the best researcher, which is given, say, on college day or graduation day, like we give so many other rewards? Think about it. Financial rewards, which need not necessarily mean money in the pocket, but it could mean flexibility in using funds which have been raised in research for other needs. How to deal with a really major and constant problem of time constraints of people doing clinical work. How do they find time? Can the institution give protected time to people? Yes, it may mean that you need a slightly larger staff. I would draw your attention to the slide I saw sent by Dr. George D'Souza, in which the college received lower marks in the NIRF ranking on the staff-student ratio. Perhaps we need to address that. And one way of addressing that is taking more staff and allowing, therefore, more time to do more academic work. I think one needs to recognize that when you're a faculty in a medical college, and we call ourselves academic clinicians, an academic clinician is not just a clinician who takes classes for students. Even corporate hospital doctors are now teaching people who have D&B. An academic clinician is much more than that, And that, I think, is a recognition that must be driven home by the leadership in the college. At the same time, the institution has a right to ask for accountability. Accountability of those to whom it has given time and the freedom to use money to do research. They should be able to demonstrate success, scientific success, academic success, and yes, even financial success in what they have done with the time and the freedom allotted to them. So I've tried in 10 minutes, Father, okay, to cover my experience in my journey and some of the issues that rose in St. John's, because that is our institution. And that first thing to know is like if you want to know why you get a heart attack, first thing is to find the risk factors and then address them. Perhaps the same approach will help you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Prem Paez, for this beautiful personal as well as institutional journey. One of the things that struck me was very most the mentorship. I also realized when I met Edmund Pellegrino, the scientist at the President's Council on Bioethics, he told me when you do a research that should have a clear-cut thesis question, and if you put a needle through your research from the beginning till the end, you should have the orientation. Mentors greatly do a role, and I'm happy that a great model, you are here with us. Thank you so much for your sharing. May I invite Dr. Chitraranjan Andrade to take over. Thank you.
Hello everybody. I'm a simple chap. I say obvious stuff. If I accidentally say anything funny, please encourage me by laughing. So if you want to be a clinician scientist, there are a lot of problems, barriers that have to be overcome. As clinical faculty, we live in different worlds. We have our careers, we have our families, and we have our personal lives with our hobbies, rest, and relaxation. In our careers, we work in several roles. We see patients, we teach, and hopefully we do research. Now, if we have to do research, time is a major barrier. We have only 24 hours in a day. To find time for research, we have to make sacrifices somewhere. Do the sacrifices come at the expense of our family time? Or do they come at the expense of, for example, our sleep, or our daily exercise, or our hobbies? To give you an example, I'm a little bit of a time terrorist. I practice extreme time management. As a researcher, I do not have time to watch TV. I don't watch movies, no Netflix, no YouTube. I hardly ever use my cell phone, no scrolling on the cell phone. I'm not on Facebook, no Instagram, no Twitter, and my classmates are very angry with me because I'm not on WhatsApp either. Yes, Prakash. I don't take coffee breaks, no social life. I eat only once a day. You save a lot of time if you skip breakfast and lunch. I save time every day, for example, by going at 6:30 in the morning to work on a two-wheeler because I beat the traffic. It's the pits in Bangalore to have to drive in traffic. I save time everywhere, even to the point of cutting my own hair so that I don't have to go to a barber shop. So you need to make time if you want to have time for research. I don't compromise on family life, I don't compromise on sleep, I don't compromise on exercise though. Health essentials are essentials. Now, interests and abilities are also a barrier to a research career. If I am a donkey, I can carry a load. I cannot climb a tree. So you cannot stuff research down everybody's throat. The individual needs to be interested and he needs to be capable of doing research. When do you discover this? I think that's a very difficult question to answer. I didn't know that I was interested in research until by accident I dropped into the research bucket, into a department that was doing research. Anyway, you start doing research and it's possible that you discover after that you have a talent, and it's possible that you discover after that you're not interested in it at all. So it evolves as time goes on. Sorry, something's going wrong. The NIMHANS model works very well for clinician researchers. In NIMHANS, faculty are recruited for research abilities. You cannot get into NIMHANS unless you have already done a lot of research, published a lot of papers. There is protected time for research at NIMHANS. We get time off during a day, during a week. We have summer vacations. We have winter vacations like school children. The pay is good, so we don't have to worry about private practice and evening practice, which will steal time from doing research if we are interested in doing research. We have excellent infrastructure at NIMHANS. If we want equipment, we indent for equipment, we get the equipment. It's as simple as that. We have multidisciplinary teams which are very easy to constitute. We have a whole department of statistics to help us with statistics if we need the help. We have excellent administrative support. We even have a dean of research, an entire section which is devoted only to managing projects. We have a library with a 550 lakh annual budget. I don't know what it is at NIMHANS, at St. John's, but can you imagine the amount of academic support we have? If only the library has an annual budget of 550 lakhs with off-campus access to all the library facilities. So, in St. John's, perhaps institutional support and funding could be a barrier to a research career, and that is something that needs to be addressed. So, what are the messages for St. John's? The first and most important message is to recognize that St. John's is a national academy and not a mission hospital. St. John's is a postgraduate training institute, and PG training institutes need to develop a reputation for excellence in research. This is inescapable. The vision of St. John's needs to change to support clinician scientists. So can, in St. John's, talent be identified and groomed separately, as Dr. Prem Pius mentioned, in different streams? Somebody is good at teaching, let him teach. Somebody is good at clinical work, let her do clinical work. Somebody is good at research and interested in research, take away her clinical responsibilities, reduce her teaching responsibilities, give her more protected time for doing research. So, can the duties and expectations from individuals be based on the individual's vocation and abilities? Can salaries and time be protected so that the individual can actually bring accolades to the institute in the form of research publications? Can philanthropic organizations, corporate social responsibility, funding be mobilized to support this kind of research? Can the expertise and talents of alumni, the research interests of alumni, be leveraged to support the interests of clinician researchers at St. John's? Can St. John's sign memoranda of understanding with other institutions to access laboratory facilities, to access statistical support, to access library facilities if you don't have the necessary journals here in St. John's? Can St. John's make structural changes, for example, digitizing the entire clinical database so that you can do, for example, retrospective cohort studies, and you can start cohorts which can go 10, 20, 50 years into the future. So these are changes that can be made in St. John's. If you as a clinician want to do research, you need to have time to read. If you are not reading journals, you don't know what research questions to ask. You don't know what research questions have already been answered. You don't know how to design your studies. You don't know what the limitation of existing studies are and what the limitations of your own research design may be. You need to read, and you need to spend several hours a day reading all the journals, not just in your field, but in other fields as well. You need to start publishing. Start with case reports. Start with doing small open studies. Do stuff like quality of life, burden, point of care studies. Start your own cohort. If you are a postgraduate teacher and you have a postgraduate student assigned to you and you are the guide for that student, the thesis should be publishable. Every thesis that is completed by a student at St. John's should find a place in a medical journal of repute. Otherwise, it's wasted time and labor and unethical for the patients who consented to participate in those studies, for their participation in the studies not to find expression in the form of a publication. Form teams. If I am good at generating ideas, somebody else is good at executing a project, somebody else is good at doing statistical analysis, somebody else is good at writing papers, we form an excellent team. Different people do different things. And at the end of that, you have research papers. Students are willing hands. If you have students in MBBS who want to participate in research in their spare time, and your postgraduate students, of course, they are willing hands, they are labor whom you can utilize for your research work. Interdepartmental, inter-institute collaboration will help in the forming of teams. Word of caution, statistics, research methodology, getting research ideas, how to do a study, these things are not learned overnight. If it takes you 4.5 years to finish your MBBS and 1 year of internship and 3 years for PG, what makes you think that you'll be a good researcher in your at the first go? Giants, from individuals to institutions, take time to grow, and it involves a lot of sweat during the process. So this is my last slide. How can I help St. John's in this endeavor? In general, I live in Bangalore, I stay 3 kilometers, I work 3 kilometers away. It's easy for me to come across over here. I can conduct courses, workshops for you on statistics, research methodology, right from the basics to more advanced stuff. At a personalized level, I can provide ideas for research in different disciplines, particularly disciplines related to my own. I can help you in designing a study, help you in data analysis, in drafting your manuscript, and in journal submission. So with this, I would like to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chittaranjan Andrade. That is beautiful. You have saved so much time. I don't know where you have deposited all the saved time. And I think you have done all the saving for the research. Thank you so much. I'd like to check with Dr. Christopher Matthias if he is ready.
I'm fine at the moment, thank you. If
Dr. Matthias, would you like to go ahead now? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We have one more speaker here. If you like, you can take over now. Otherwise, we'll come back after one more speaker.
No, I'm in your hands. It's so nice listening. So if you can put me at the end, that'll be even better.
Thank you.
I'll be better educated.
Thank you so much. Yeah, may I invite now Dr. Pat Kamath to take over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pri and Sucharita and Maya, for putting this together. I think it's a great service to the institution. And thank you for giving me the privilege to speak here. Hi, Ranga. So, in this, is that not? Oh, that's the one. Okay, good. So really, clinical research is filling knowledge gaps. We want to know how to better diagnose, how to prevent a disease, or how to treat the disease. And once you have read your research, then publication is the medium to widely disseminate your research findings. And please don't underestimate the power of publications, because publications will get you recognized as an expert. So in this talk, I'll go over why a busy clinician should carry out research, and second is how you go about it. And as a disclosure, I'm not a clinician scientist. I'm a very busy clinician educator. I spend most of my time seeing patients and with fellows, and when we see something that we cannot understand, then we try and figure it out. And so I think research is important, and I try and find time to do it, but then I get somebody else to cut my hair. Okay, so why should you carry out research? It's to fill in knowledge gaps. And remember, the ideas you're going to get is from your patient. So those are the best ways to get an idea. You see a patient, you don't know really what to do, that's something that you're going to study. And you have to solve these problems because you're the one who's going to see these patients, and you have to solve the problems for your patient. The patient in the lab is not going to solve these problems for you, is only going to help you solve these problems. And this is the great part about clinical research. The moment a paper is online, immediately you can apply it to your next patient. But basic research often takes decades and sometimes never has an impact on clinical research. So to summarize, research will make you an expert. It will make your job a career and reduce burnout. And burnout, talking about burnout is one of my favorite topics, okay? So burnout is a syndrome resulting from chronic workplace stress. It is characterized by feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, not putting your heart into your job, and a declining sense of personal accomplishment. Maybe can I see a show of hands? Any of you experiencing this, or no colleagues who are experiencing this? So, but perhaps you're happier than physicians in the United States, because right now, and this is work from Tate Shanafelt, one of my previous residents, and now he's at Stanford, 63% of US physicians have at least one burnout symptom, and that's an increase over recent years, and only 30% are satisfied with work-life balance, okay? And why is this important? For the individual, someone who's burning out has broken relationships, higher risk of alcohol and substance abuse, depression, and suicide. And at a professional level, there's decreased quality of care and increased medical errors by these physicians. There's decreased patient satisfaction, and these physicians are not very productive. And not only that, they make it difficult for others, so there's increased physician turnover. But there is a solution. If you want to avoid burnout, do something meaningful in your day. So again, this is from Tate Shanafelt. Those who spend more than 20% of their time doing something meaningful have less risk of burnout than those who are spending less than that. So essentially what you're saying is 1 day a week or 2 hours a day on most meaningful activity. It can be a certain type of procedure you're doing, or teaching or research. This is going to be associated with a low risk of burnout. So, again, to summarize, 2 hours a day doing something meaningful to you, and I'd like to submit that doing research will give you meaning in your life and will delay burnout. You're going to get more joy at your work, and so I think everyone should do research. So to summarize again, it'll recognize you as an expert in the field. Once you're an expert, you're going to get referred the patients you want to see. There may be corporate hospitals around, but if you're published and you are an expert, you are going to get these patients. It's going to improve the quality of your practice, and of course, it's going to prevent professional burnout. So once you realize research is a priority, how do you go about it? So I like to characterize research as low effort. That is, you're doing it mainly on your own, or high effort. That has major funding, you require big teams. Your research can have high impact, that is, it changes practice, or it's low impact, so it's ignored by most physicians. So that gives you 4 different groups. Low effort, case reports, series, but they're likely to have a low impact and may be ignored by most physicians. If you do validation study, do a large study which somebody else has done, maybe you show a little different. Those are called incremental studies. Again, they're likely to have a low impact. Try and focus on high impact, those that changes practice. So start with the green box and then move over. So your astute clinical observations that answer important clinical questions, that's initially low effort, but they have a high impact. And once you observe something and you want to look at it in higher groups, then you do what Salim and Prem and Dennis Xavier are doing. You go into large clinical trials. And again, cannot overemphasize the importance of astute clinical research. So I looked at all the papers from Mayo, and that's a reasonable research institute, and I looked at only the papers with more than 2,500 citations. So over 1,000 citation is considered a great paper. So I looked at those with over 2,500, and 50% were based on simple clinical observations. They were all unfunded studies. So important clinical observations. So how do you carry out the research? I think the most important is ask the question, what is the knowledge gap here? Once you have the question, then you find a mentor, you find your collaborators, and most important of all, you make the time to carry this out. General, avoid laboratory-based studies when you're starting off, because you want to control everything. So that studies that don't require to leave your office, these are the ones that are most likely to be successful. And find the time to write. So this is disseminating your research. Carry manuscripts with you, use airport waits, flights to write papers. Block time to write, even if you're only for a few sentences daily. Remember, books are a collection of sentences. So I have a colleague who spends 30 minutes a day. He blocks up 30 minutes a day. Nothing else is going to be done. He's going to write a few sentences that day. And that's why he's one of my most productive colleagues. When you write, our usual tendency is to write and write and write and keep writing until you have no more ideas. And then you cannot start off again because you need new ideas to write. So I would suggest you read Stephen King, the author. It's a book called On Writing. He says, always leave the last sentence or the last idea unfinished. And the next day, it's much easier for you to start off, and then you continue going that way. Home is for the family. I didn't do any work at home until my children left the home. So that's really important. It will prevent burnout too. There are impediments for the busy clinician. Researcher, as your researcher, it's giving up too easily, saying, I cannot get this done. Mentor, not looking for the right one hard enough. Nowadays, I think you don't have to have a mentor in the institution. You can look elsewhere. But I think the most important is you not asking the right question. If you ask something which is clinically really important, you will find someone to mentor you and someone to collaborate with you. So my take-home messages on why and how the research should be carried out by busy clinicians. Publications get published. It's going to recognize you as an expert. You're going to get referrals and patients you want to see. The best research ideas are going to come from the patients across you. Fill knowledge gaps that are important clinically. Find a collaborator, find a mentor, and most important, find the time. And I trust you, trust me, you will be happy at your work. And finally, remember, success, there's no escalator to success. You have to take the steps, and some of these steps are going to be slippery. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. That is wonderful to listen to you. May I invite Dr. Christopher Matthias to speak.
Thank you very much. I will just share the screen. If I may. Fine. Can you see the slides? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we don't see your presentation. You wanted to share
can't-
some
You can't
documents?
see the slides. Oh, am I not sharing the screen then? Sorry about that. Well, I just wonder whether I'd sent the slides, whether in fact they can be put up. I don't know why I cannot share the screen.
Yeah.
Give me half a moment
Maybe
again.
you're not put him as a host, so you cannot share. Put it in front of you. Co-host? Or you have the...
We have your slides, sir.
Oh, would you be so kind? Because I don't know, it looks as though I've got to change one of my desktop computers.
In the email. Open the email.
Pen drive. Developing research.
No,
For developing research.
no. In the email.
Mail.
Outlook. No, it's not here.
Who sent
Actually, I've got it. Can you see it
Yeah.
now?
Ah, yeah. Yes.
Now we can see it.
You can see it. Brilliant.
So make a
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
Fine.
Yes, perfect.
Thank you very much. Well, firstly, to Sukarita and Priya, thank you very much for organising this and for asking me to speak. And in a way, I'm very pleased that I'm the last speaker on this, because it was marvellous listening to various people and the amazing work which they have done. Now, one of the things about this was sharing experiences, and this is exactly what I'm going to be doing, if you don't mind, giving you some examples of what has happened to me over the years. It might appear busy, and I'm going to be fairly quick, and I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be doing an Usain Bolt, as it were, speeding along. Now, I've been very fortunate, in fact, incredibly fortunate, and this is why I like the poem by Kipling, which is If, which again emphasizes how one has a number of problems which need to be overcome at times. I was uncertain, in fact, and so some of the questions I'm putting up is initially, why medicine? And this goes back to being a peri-teenager. I enjoyed investigative novels. I enjoyed those where there was a happy ending. Those seemed to please me most. And it's a few years later that I listened to a cousin of mine who was in a final year at Bangor Medical College. And it became very clear that you could ask the questions, you could investigate people, and you could actually help them, which really triggered my thirst, in fact, to go into a career in medicine. I was very fortunate to have joined St. John's in 1965. And I just make a point here, it's so important in a way to have the influence of batchmates and your colleagues, because it does help mold you sometimes and very often for the better. And even more important, because I joined St. John's at the age of 16, I suppose, relatively immature, I suppose, when I think back. It was a marvelous course. And at the end of it, the question was, how does one continue? And I completed my ECFMG, and the plan was to go to the United States, as it was many of my contemporaries had done and had got into fame and fortune, as it were. I took a different route, as it were, because I saw an advertisement for a Rhodes Scholarship in the papers and thought this could be of interest, really, pure curiosity, because this is one of the things which I think is very important for a researcher, at any rate, curiosity and experience. I applied. I was certain that I was going to get no further. I was shortlisted, again, to my surprise. And then there was rather stringent evaluation at the Madras Club in Madras, as it was those days, rather than Chennai. And I thought there was no chance of getting it, especially since I fluffed one of the things when I was asked, what research would you do if you went to Oxford? And I said, well, I would ensure that I did more clinical work and got the membership, the MRCP, so that clinically I could practice far better, as it were. That didn't go down too well, and to my surprise, in fact, I was one of the 2 Rhodes Scholars selected, and hence my going to Oxford, where I landed in October 1972. I was very fortunate to be in a place called Worcester College, which has beautiful gardens, and I say that knowing that Bangalore itself is noted for its beautiful gardens. But more importantly, they had the medical tutor called John Walker, and he played quite a role in my career. He was an autonomic pharmacologist, which I did not know at the time, because he was effectively a sort of pastoral role for people like myself who completed a degree. Now, the plan was to do cardiology in Oxford, research in cardiology. But this didn't go down well. It's a slightly longer story, so I won't say more other than the professor, Peter Slight, was on a sabbatical in Australia. And my initial visitation to the cardiology department did not go down well, as it were. It was a marvelous department, as Salim will know, because he joined Peter Slight, and as you know, he's gone on to great fame, as it were. So I went back to John Walker and I said, well, I can't do cardiology, it looks as though it's estates. And he said, well, why don't you do neurology? And I said, I don't want to do neurology. And he said, why don't you combine the 2? And this is where the autonomic nervous system came in. And he said, I think I know who the person is. And I'm going to show you a few slides now, just to emphasize some of the points which are listed here on simplicity and collaboration. John Walker introduced me to John Spaulding, who's a neurologist, but he had particular interest in the autonomic nervous system, and I think is one of the fathers, really, of autonomic research, clinical autonomic research. John took me on at the end of 1972, and he said, well, you should work out how patients with tetanus on respirators have hypertension and hypotension. Now, that seemed a bit of a tall order, but I joined a team, went to Nigeria, because there were very few patients in Oxford because of the immunization program. And so started on the autonomic nervous system. And I showed this slide just to make the point that the autonomic nervous system is not the simplest of systems. It affects every organ in the body, and also controls key factors such as blood pressure, heart rate, and thermoregulation, which are essential for survival, as it were. The research in Nigeria was amazing in terms of the practical experience, but as you can imagine, in what would be called, I suppose, at the time a third world country, even though the oil riches were enormous, I couldn't get much research as such done, but amazing practical experience. So I came back really with no data and had to think again. And I thought, well, let's be simple. I've got a simple mind, so let's go for a simple approach, as it were, in terms of neurovascular control. And of course, the baroreceptors are very important, as shown in this simple slide. Normally, you get the afferents to the brain, the efferents to the vagus, and the sympathetic coming down the cord. And the plan was, why not study patients who had cervical cord transection? You could be sure of where the lesion is. You know that the afferents are intact, the vagal efferents are intact, but it's not going down the cord. So there's no control by the brain. So those are tetraplegics. There were very few autonomic failure patients those days. John Spaulding had a few, and they have got lesions, sometimes unclear, right through the neural axis, as it were, causing autonomic deficits. So we started on the tetraplegic patients. And just to give you an example, this is blood pressure continuously in the tetraplegic when they are tilted upright. So if you're sitting, they can't usually stand. The blood pressure falls markedly, quite unlike a normal subject. The heart rate goes up because the vagus tries very hard to control heart rate, but unsuccessfully. So that's the typical problem with hypotension or orthostatic hypotension, because the nerves are not controlling, the brain is not controlling the nerves. Now, they're a unique model because you can get the reverse, which is known as autonomic dysreflexia. And this slide gives you an example of that. If the bladder, for instance, is distended, or the bowel, the blood pressure can shoot up enormously. And this hypertension can cause disastrous effects. So there are two sides, as it were, which made it a most interesting model to try and work out what was going on, why this was happening, as it were. The clinical side, I quickly add, has always been of importance to me. And this is where the research questions should have some bearing. And this is taken from one of the patients. I wasn't responsible for this. He did have a blocked urinary catheter, had severe hypertension, blew a blood vessel in the brain, and that's sadly what happened to them. So there can be nasty sequelae, as it were, to this. I was very fortunate in these studies, working with Hans Frankel, who very sadly passed away last year. He was the director at the National Spinal Injury Centre at Stoke Mandeville, which is about 20 miles from Oxford, and so was, within a reasonable distance, as it were, to continue with the research, predominantly at the time there. Now, at the time the question was asked, why is this happening? Could there be neurotransmitters involved? What was the biochemistry? What was happening? Fortunately, in 1970, von Euler, Axelrod, and Katz got the Nobel Prize for their work on neurotransmitters. Von Euler because of noradrenaline and adrenaline. And the question I asked was, can we measure these substances when the blood pressure goes up or is going down and see what the relationship is? Now, the problem lay with the vasodilators. In Oxford, there were assays for prostaglandins, but not for noradrenaline, adrenaline, and renin, hence moving away, which moved me to visit, he was then Professor Pierre, not yet knighted at the time, in December 1973. He was the champion kingpin for the renin-angiotensin system. We talked, he agreed, this was just for Christmas, to collaborate. So we would do the measurements of renin, angiotensin 2, and aldosterone. Noradrenaline was more difficult. I had to go abroad to Aarhus in Denmark to recruit Professor Christensen on our side, and he did. I'm not showing you a picture of his because of time. So we got the assays going. The research work went reasonably well, I thought. It must have been because I was awarded a DPhil from that. And I hope this makes the points about simplicity in the model, collaboration, and linking up. The problem came post-DPhil because I got really hooked onto autonomic research. In humans, I quickly add, you'd say so, rather than in animals. And the problem was, where do I go from there? And my mentors were very frank, and they said autonomic medicine doesn't exist. It's great for doing research, getting a few papers. You've got to do either cardiology or neurology or some other discipline. So it was a dilemma. And I thought, well, the best, and got advice, was to do more clinical work. I hadn't done enough clinical work, which was most valuable in Portsmouth, doing respiratory medicine, cardiology, renal work. At the end of those 2 years with the MRCP, I went back to Stan Piet, who I'd been in communication with, and said, well, where do I go? And he said, it doesn't exist. He said, it's a pipe dream. But he very kindly said, why don't you join me? Because we've got a broad department, the medical unit at St. Mary's, was well stocked with all disciplines, and joined me. But you've got to get the funding. So I went to the Wellcome Trust. I was very fortunate to get funding initially for 5 years and then much more, and joined St. Mary's Hospital Medical School, working with him. This just gives you a picture of it. This is an artistic impression. The laboratory, this is the hospital end. This was the bridge to the medical school where the laboratories were. And I point this out because it's got an amazing history, one of which, of course, is that of Fleming, who discovered penicillin. And years later, I did have an office which is above where he discovered it. By the way, this is before the hospital had been sort of cleaned after 70, 80 years, as it were. Now, the work with Stan Piet went very well. We were looking at the neural autonomic control of high blood pressure. But then it became clear to me that we needed to go beyond. And this is where the collaboration with Sir Roger Bannister came in. Roger Bannister was both at St. Mary's and Queen Square, the neurology hospital, which was most fortunate. He'd also been my PhD DPhil examiner. so he knew of me, and we started talking. And in '81, we decided to begin collaboration because he had access through Queen Square to a whole range of neurological patients. And this is where the link came, including my initially being an honorary clinical assistant, that's right at the bottom of the range, as it were, at the National Hospital for Nervous Diseases, as it was called those days, at Queen Square. And the combination worked very well because there was neurology well stocked, and at St. Mary's there were all the other disciplines, so you could combine the two. This worked, extremely well, and in the mid-'80s, I was running effectively with the supervision, of course, two units, one the neurovascular medicine unit at St. Mary's, and increasingly the autonomic investigation unit at Queen Square. But then the mid-'80s problems arose because one, Roger Bannister decided to go to Oxford. He became the president of a college at Pembroke, a master at Pembroke. And Stan Peart was retiring in 1987, and the difficulty arose, should I continue or should I not? Again, mentorship and support was so important. And of course, the juniors, I say juniors, they were equivalent, if not better than me, the research staff and the collaborators. And the work was going pretty well, in fact, in the mid-'80s, until I made the decision to stay, even though there was no real post, as it were, available. So a bit of a chancer, taking the untraveled path, as I think Venkat, when we were talking, talked to me about, you see, the Frost poem.
Dr. Matthias, we'd like to request you to wind up soon. Yeah.
Yes, I'm almost finished. And I was very fortunate to get a chair in neurovascular medicine between Imperial and Queen Square. The work continued and grew because I founded a journal, Clinical Autonomic Research. And this gives you an indication of how, as one was known, the patients started flocking in. Initially, in 1985, there were about 500 often research. This grew, almost doubled in the 90s, with work on syncope and fainting. And in the new millennium, it shot up even further with POTS. And so an enormous number, as it were, need continue from where it started. And it's going up even further now because autonomic dysfunction is one of the components in 30% of patients with long COVID. So a huge amount. This needed a fair amount of infrastructural change because clearly I couldn't do this on my own or with researchers. And so we developed clinical autonomic scientists, a role for them, or biochemical autonomic scientists, and also clinical nurse specialists. So all that was really rather important. So I'm going to end with this slide, in fact, which takes me to Charlie Mackessy's book, a marvelous book, which I saw first before the pandemic. And it was the captions, which I really liked. By the way, there's a film on it, which I haven't seen. And to really summarize, the realistic but slightly pessimistic boy says, we have a very long way to go because we still have got to solve all these problems with POTS and long COVID, et cetera, et cetera. But then the horse was the more optimistic one. And he says, yes, but look how far we have come. So on that, I'm going to end and say, well, we have a lot to do, but a lot has been done. Autonomic medicine does exist now as established departments, certainly at Queen Square and Imperial. And I just end really just to thank people. I'm not going to go through this, but an enormous number of people over the years have been responsible for me in this work and keeping me, I think as Patrick said, and others have said, fulfilled. I think that's probably the best word to end on. Thank you very much. And sorry for taking the time.
Thank you, Dr. Matthias. Yes, we have come so far and we have a long way to go. And during this Diamond Jubilee celebration, I'd like to say all the speakers, you are the true diamonds. Thank you being a great role models and inspiring clinician scientists to us. And we have long way to go and you are there to guide us. Thank you. And for lack of time, we will not go for question and answer session. I'd like to request Dr. Tony to wrap up.
Thank you, Reverend Father Charles. Again,
on behalf of the academic committee of the Diamond Jubilee team, I'd like to thank each and every faculty who have shared their truly remarkable journeys. And it's really inspiring for all the young people here or people who are online to listen to their stories. And what came through as a thread was definitely mentorship, immersion. Most of you all who were mentored were immersed into an environment that was in research, and your inspiration and your passion has taken you and brought you so far. We really look forward to working with each of you all. Some of these points which came up are staying agnostic, staying focused, work as an interdisciplinary team. I think these are important points. Thanks to Dr. Chetu for sharing the Nimans model. Again, he shared about mentoring and grooming individuals. And of course, Dr. Patrick Kamath talking about burnout and work-life balance, which is important, stirring your passion and disseminating your knowledge. I'm sorry I'm not able to collate everything, but we will put this all together and share it with all faculty and students of St. John's. But thank you so much for your time, and thank you for contributing back to St. John's. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I take this opportunity to thank Priya and Dr. Sucharita for their wonderful coordination to set up this session, and everyone behind the scenes.
Thank you very much, everyone. And before I ask our chairpersons to hand over a little token of our appreciation, a very warm welcome to Father Kalam. Welcome, sir. Father Kalam was a previous director of St. John's and also the chief, I think, officiant at my own wedding. I now request Father Charles to please hand over a memento to Dr. Prem Pais. And to Dr. Chitranjan also, please. Dr. Tony, could we request you to hand over the memento to Dr. Patrick Kamath? A very big thank you to Professor Christopher Matthias and Professor Venkat Narayan also. We'll have to send you an e-memento. And if I could ask Dr. Patrick Kamath to please hand over mementos to our chairpersons, we'll bring this session to a close. I invite Dr. Andrade and Dr. Patrick Kamath off the stage. I'll ask Dr. Prem Pais to stretch his legs but come back. So we will move on directly to the next session, after which I promise you all a coffee break. If you need to leave the auditorium, there is a door at the back if you need a restroom break. So we'll move on quickly to the next session. Intro slides.
Yeah, it's fine. Listen.
So the next session is a moderated discussion. The topic of the discussion will be the way forward, creating a supportive environment for researchers on campus. To moderate the discussion, we have Dr. Anurag Kurpad, the founding dean of the St. John's Research Institute, for almost a decade. We also have Dr. Salim Yusuf, Distinguished University Professor of Medicine at McMaster University. Joining us on the panel, who will give the introductory slides on the NIRF rankings in St. John's, is the Dean of the Medical College, Dr. George D'Souza. Welcome, sir. Dr. Prem Pais will return. Dr. Prem Pais was Dean of Medical College from 2004 to 2013. I invite Dr. Jyoti Prabhu. She is an associate professor and head of the Division of Molecular Medicine at St. John's Research Institute. She is a recipient of the Intermediate Career Fellowship Grant in Clinical and Public Health category from the India Alliance. I also invite Dr. Shruti Kulkarni. Come on, Shruti. Who is Associate Professor General Medicine, St. John's Medical College and Hospital, and who has recently been awarded a grant to study iron and inflammation. I'm going to hand over to Dr. Salim to briefly describe what we're going to do in this session. Dr. Anura will begin.
So thank you all for being here. It's a pleasure to have you in this nice auditorium. And we have a long way to go, so let me just immediately invite Salim to get the ball rolling, and then we'll keep going. Just wanted to shout out to Father Kalam at the back, who was my director as well, and to Ranga Nayak, who helped build this building.
Well, thank you, Anura. I know you all want coffee. I can't do anything about it, okay? But I'll do something to improve your health, prevent deep vein thrombosis. So stand up, everybody. Come on. Shake off that nap you're taking. Come on, stand up, everybody. Nobody's... That's right, stretch. All right. Now, sit down and stand up again. Now, at the World Heart Federation, when I was the president, every meeting with the emerging leaders, it was their idea, after each talk, you not only clapped, you stood up and clapped. And you got down. So, hi Ranga. Good. So, that clapping is for that brilliant 5 speakers we had. Surprisingly, they were different. Now you can sit down. Surprisingly, they were different, but there was one word in common. Does anybody know the one word everybody said? Come on. Huh? Mentor, yeah, or time, mentor, so 2 words. Yeah. Collaboration, 3. Enjoy, 4. Actually, the one word I identified was question. Research always starts with a question. Okay? So, but what we'll do now is we will first start off with a very brief presentation from our Dean, George, because there is a need for what we started a decade or so ago. And sadly, the institution could have done better. I must be honest, everybody knows me, so, and hopefully people won't take offense at it. But the truth is, we've dropped in our rankings and we haven't done as well in research. So I think nobody more authoritative, authentic, free of bias to present the information other than our Dean. Come on, George.
Was it? So good morning, it's still morning. At the outset, I'd like to thank all those, particularly the alumni from India and abroad, who have, I mean, there was a lot of banter in the group and a lot of positive remarks that came in, and today also we had a lively session, and I hope that this will lead towards a greater research environment in St. John's. The National Institute ranking framework which is by the HRD ministry, gives an idea about what are the things that maybe we could improve upon. This was started in 2015, and it is to rank all the institutions in the country, and there's a separate ranking for medical colleges. It had a committee, and it draws its recommendations from that committee. When we first went in, we were 19. We were 14 in 2020, and this year we came down to 19th rank. So 12th, 14th, and 19th. Interestingly, during this period, our scores actually gradually improved. What it means is that while we are sort of, I mean, there are other institutions that have gone beyond us. There may be some reason I don't want to discuss that, but I think we should introspect on our own ranking and see what we can do better. So this is the framework by which the scores, the weightage of the different scores for different parameters. So there is 10% for peer perception, there's 10% for outreach and inclusivity, there's 20% for graduation outcomes, there's 30% for research, and there's 30% for teaching learning resources. Now, teaching learning resources, we by and large do fairly well, and we're comparable even in the current ranking amongst the top 10 medical schools in the country. Similarly, if you look at graduation outcomes, our ranking is within the top 10 institutions in the country. But it is this large chunk of research and professional practice which is where our rank is not so great. Outreach and activity, it's okay. Peer perception, the weightage is very low. Our ranking is not bad, not good, could be better. So we will also discuss that briefly. So if you look at the research, different criteria that are looked at, it is the publications per faculty, the quality of publications, patents, grants and consultations. And as you can see, from the total weightage that is given for grants, we are nearly 81% of the score that is there. So there we do reasonably well. But the weightage for that is very minuscule among the research bundle that they take. The majority of the score is for publications per faculty and the quality of publications. And then of course there is patents, but again, patents, this weightage is only about 5 to 10%. And again, for patents, if you compare with other institutions, it's okay. It's not too bad. So the place that where we scope only is publications per faculty and the quality of publications. Peer perception is another area. This is done by sending a survey to different medical college faculty, and this is something that we score average, but like I said, other institutions also, I think because there are a vast number of institutions, but we could do better by improving, publicizing what Johnites do in top academic, scientific, corporate positions in the world, memberships, which we should encourage our faculty, and what their contribution to research is, which we do not well publicize. So how can we improve? We have to increase the number of publications per faculty. We have to improve the quality of publications. We have to encourage patents. We have to increase research grants. This is another thing that we need to look at, is to increase the doctoral student intake of the college. undergraduates, postgraduate courses, I think we do quite well. We have enhanced the number of postdoctoral DM MCH courses over the last couple of years, and I think we have steadily increased the number of seats there. I think those are all relatively closed areas. I don't think we can do more there. But definitely the number of PhD students in our college is far, far low, and we've tried various ways, but we have not been succeeded. There are some impediments, like the rules and regulations in the university, getting people to become guides. All that is much more cumbersome than the regular MBBS and postgraduate recognition. But even having said that, the number of students doing PhD is low. And if you have very low number of PhD students, automatically the number of publications, etc., the amount of research that happens in departments, all that comes down. So that is something that we need to figure out how we're going to improve. And like we said, we need to publicize what Johnites do in top academic, scientific, and corporate position over the world, so that we get better noticed and it improves our what people perceive about us and improves our ranking. Thank you.
Well, thank you, George. You identified quite rightly a number of improvements, but they're outputs. They're measurements of outcomes. We won't get there until we have a plan, until we have enablers. Now, I had written down the key things that are needed. First is you need an environment where research is valued. How do you value something? You publicize it. You promote people for it, that it's an essential part of the criteria. You reward people financially for it. And you need an organized structure, just like Patrick and others said. You need different career streams. Not everybody can be a super duper cardiac surgeon, at the same time being a fantastic teacher, at the same time being a fantastic researcher and a fantastic administrator. The days of the Renaissance man has to change. So we need career streams with somebody doing largely research, 80% research, 10-20% teaching and clinical work, and the other way around. Every non-clinical faculty should be required to have high research component. They have more protected times. They don't have night calls, weekend calls, all of that. In my university, that's a requirement. The second thing is we need to create good infrastructure. By that I mean statistical departments, the computing facilities, supporting labs. You can't expect the researcher to go and develop each one each time. The other one is the individual matters. So we recruit onto faculty not because there is a clinical need, but you recruit to faculty based on a vision. What do we want St. John's to be 10 years from now? And with that, and what does each department want? It's not that I'm short of people for night calls, I'm going to get people in. You tough it out till you get the right people in. So you come up with a plan. When you get these people with passion for research and creativity, so they are going to do this. The person who knows Harrison from the first page to the last page may not be your best researcher. So that needs to come through. And people need to learn to persevere. We talked about mentoring. So we need to talk about that. And we need a corpus of seed funds. So, I mean, which some of the groups at the Research Institute have got. But in my institute, we have an biannual competition where we give a certain amount of money, not a lot of money, but they need to get started with that. It's competitive. They learn to write a small grant. It's competitive. It's not free money. And they have to develop. The pilot studies they do with that is then used to get external funding from CIHR, NIH. So then they've already learned the process. And the other thing is you have to publish. You've heard that from several people. I tell my younger people, if you haven't published, your work does not exist. It is of no value to anybody. So I've always heard people say, oh, I did all this 5 years ago. That's my idea that he stole when the paper comes out. That's not a very informed comment. The other thing is, we've heard about Chitranjan's excellent advice on balancing different things. And the last point I want to say is, we have to develop a discipline of writing. I keep 1 day a week to write. It's rigid. I don't give it up. It's not to answer my emails. It's not to review somebody else's grants. It's not to read a journal. It's not to answer administrative questions. It is to write. To me, that day is valuable because I think when I write. And as I think, I'm at peace. It's my meditation. So now different people can have different things. There are books written on how to write. How do you protect your time? We can discuss it. So this, in a sense, I've told you everything I wanted to tell you. But now I'll hand over to Anura, who, now the format of this is going to be as follows. We have a bunch of questions that have come in. And the organizers, Priya and Sucharitra, I hope I pronounced it right, organized it in a nice way. And they're in about 5 or 6 sections. Anura will start with the first, and then ask for comments from you guys and from the wise people on the podium. So it's interactive. No more talks, no more slides, okay? And the second set of questions I'll take, and the third Anura will lead, and so on. And we have cards out to people for questions, in addition or not really? Don't worry. Okay, don't worry about it. Okay. Okay, Anura, over to you, my friend.
So thanks, Salim. I just want to also tell you that for me, I think this session on clinician scientists should broaden its perspective to include public health. I think clinical health and public health go hand in hand. Can you hear me?
And basic science.
Yeah, and basic science, of course. So Patrick, clinical and public health, is that okay? Good. Now, the first set of questions that came, and there were so many questions, we had to arrange them in little buckets. And so the first bucket was the role of the individual and the institution in research. And very briefly, the questions were, what can we as faculty do to encourage a culture of research among us? And that people asked us to share thoughts on how they could evolve into clinician scientists and its scope, and what are the challenges that they face to pursue their careers. Now, as Salim said, we want to involve you in this. It's not about us just talking. So at this point, I think first I'm going to ask anyone from here wants to say anything with regard to these questions. George, no? Quickly, but because we don't have too much time. The question was, what can you do as Dean, I think, I'm going to put that to you, to encourage a culture of research among us and our peers? And I think you can take your cue from what Salim was saying.
Yeah, I mean,
come up here.
Just yell. Just yell.
Yeah, so what can we do? I mean, I think in the medical school, one of the things that, is the PG dissertation. It's an important thing that needs to be supported and needs to be taken more seriously. I think if you have 130 postgraduates and you do that well, then there are 2 things that happen. One is you get 130 good quality publications. And I think all those 130 things could be pilots or could be an extension of pilots. And if they, otherwise what happens, this whole exercise is a wasted exercise, both for the student and for this. And this is something, which we have to do because we are teachers here. So this is something that I've always said, not only here, in other forums also. I think we don't pay enough emphasis on the dissertation.
But
Having said that,
let me put you on the spot, George.
okay.
Will you be willing to give clinicians here some amount of protected time?
Okay. Protected time, I think, has to be given from the individual departments.
Very good.
Because, I mean, that's having said that. Second, protected time should result in results. Because I know there are departments who have given protected time and nothing happened. I know a department is to give once a week for this, and I don't think there were a large number of publications from that department. So, I mean, we can give protected time, and like Salim just said, he said that instead of, maybe some people have to do a little extra duties so that one person gets, and he'll also get his protected time. So he said that instead of hiring people immediately, you find the right person. But I would say for this also,
you can give it and
yes.
you can take it away.
No, we
People
can
don't
take
do
it,
well.
but see, for example, I mean, it's the department head has to take that call.
But you carry the whip, George.
Yeah, you're right, but I think it's start with the head of the department.
Yeah.
They are individual, it's to start there. And they too should feel the need to give, and they should feel the need to monitor it.
I think Salim wants to say something.
Yeah.
Well, it starts with everybody. I think, George, you're washing your hands off by saying it starts with the head of the department. It starts with you as the head of the institution to say, this is our policy. Departments should be evaluated on their research productivity. If there is a criteria that X amount of funds that goes to a department is not just for clinical performance and teaching, but also for research productivity, that department head is going to stand up to attention. Okay? So that would be one. It should start at the bottom. If you recruit people with curiosity, they will do it even if you don't give them spare time. The other thing is at McMaster, every department head is somebody with a strong research background. So you don't have to persuade that person. And it's not seniority based. It's the best person. There's a committee that appoints it. So a lot depends on that. But there may be others. I think we should hear from others who haven't spoken.
Anything? Quickly.
I think to promote a research culture, what has been spoken by eminent speakers thus far is that we should identify who are interested in actual research. Are they really, it's not everyone's cup of tea, probably first identifying and maybe to create tracks, clear tracks as research scientists, teachers, and then clinicians.
That's what Salim was saying.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then also to do three things, to provide them time, resources, and more importantly, recognition.
Very good. Thank you. So at this point, I just want to ask, because there's an international audience here, I hope, I want to just pick up on something Patrick said, which was, I think you need to link people with mentors, and the mentors need not be within the institution. They could be anywhere in the world. And in fact, I want to tell you with great happiness that George has agreed, right? George, don't go back on this now. He has agreed that we should form these kind of partnerships between interested faculty here and alumni in different countries of expertise who are willing to take them on and maybe even host them for short visits to develop ideas. And here's where George has agreed to pay for it, right? You said you'll pay for their ticket to go. So then eventually if they land up, then the job of the host is to host, to look after that person's expenses and other things while there. And eventually the outcome should be something that moves on. I mean, we can talk about what we want as an outcome, but we do think we want at the end of this Diamond Jubilee meeting to identify a process by which we link people up internationally in some way. Any thoughts from here or from the audience? Yes, Dilip.
It's Lobo from Nottingham. First of all, I'd like to thank you for having a really enlightening session, but I'm a bit disappointed by the number of people from the Institute who are present here, and I think they've missed out on some really great talks. one theme that emerged all through was that research is not for everyone. And I think we have to really cultivate good researchers to do more work rather than force it on everyone. Because if you force research on every faculty member, you'll end up with research fraud or improper research being done, and that brings the institution into disrepute. Again, for promotions, I think you have to have streams for teaching and research, or a combination of teaching and research. You can't promote everyone who's a clinician to professor. There are those who are good clinicians and they like looking after patients, but really, do they have to be professors, and do they have to be counted when all research outputs are taken into consideration? And these are things we've got to look at, because if you force research down everyone's throat, it just stagnates and you get rubbish out.
Yeah. Sorry. Prem, would you like to say anything?
No, except, yeah. So, except as I showed in one of the slides, that they said the advantages I had in my research. And one was, at that time, my position as dean. Because I agree that ultimately it is the dean, when I say dean, it means the academic head of the institution, who has to drive the policies of the institution, academic policies of the institution, and has to drive it both in terms of the faculty and students, as well as in the management. So ultimately, that's where the burden lies.
Shruti, just introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Dr. Shruti from the Department of Medicine. I'm an associate professor. I've been fortunate to get good mentors, and whatever we heard today, I have been hearing it for a long time now. But I have a few things to say. First, to kind of extend what Dr. George D'Souza said, that protected time should end up in some outcome, result, or publication. To get protected time is very difficult, one. The second thing is, for people who are new into research, it's a whole world of its own. And I want to tell him that I just think, I took about 4 months to just write up one grant. So now how do I tell them that my protected time just went into reading? I didn't publish anything, nothing came out of it. It just went into reading and writing up a grant. So what is the time frame that they will give us when they give us protected time to show the output? It may take 2 years, it may take 3 years. And when will they decide that this amount of protected time is enough protected time to show the results? The second thing is, unfortunately, the exposure to research should happen right from the beginning. It's happening in this institution. Undergraduates, postgraduates are getting exposed to great mentors, great amount of exposure. But to be a clinical scientist, well, I took up medicine because medicine was my passion. And I wanted to be good at it. So in the beginning, you're trying to be good at it. I got a good clinical mentor as well. So your passion goes into that and you get drained there. And then when you're getting exposed to research, honestly, I felt like I needed only for my promotions. Only later on, as I got into it, I realized the large impact it has. And then I used to wonder, why are people doing big researches and why do they want like 20,000 people and 30,000 people in their research? And then I saw the immediate impact it has on policies. So to change policies, to have an immediate impact on patient outcome. So that doesn't get in as soon as we start doing something. We need somebody to show us through and through as to why research and the impact that it has.
Very good. Thank you. Those are great comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to encourage comments from the floor. So if you've got comments, write it down. Don't speak, because usually you waste a lot of time speaking. If you write it down, Anura and I can avoid duplication. I have one, so to respect that, I'll start off with quality improvement projects. That's a quick way to get publications. Do we have a requirement for quality improvement projects from every trainee and every faculty member, George? No. In our place, that is a requirement for everybody who's a resident or a fellow. They have to have that. And almost always, it leads to some kind of small publication. So that's an easy one. That's where your dissertation, yeah, the dissertation.
Thomas Matthew, who's the vice dean of post-graduation.
Yes, please.
Specifically looking at that.
So just repeat the question. I was just getting for a paper to write the question. You can just tell them what did you say?
No, is there a requirement for quality work to be done as part of school?
There is no
Please
quality
use-
check on.
Please use the mic.
Thanks, I'm Dr. Thomas from Department of Neurology. There is no quality check on the publications, but we usually recommend is that for postgraduates like BM.
Actually, the question wasn't that. Quality improvement is you look at some area where you're treating, like say heart attacks or acute strokes. Are you treating, what proportion of people at St. John's Hospital are treated fast, treated with the right medicines, treated at the right dose, the side effects are big. So it's just documenting what we do, and then when you find gaps, you try to find out what are the gaps and why do the gaps occur. Then the next step is, what can we do to overcome the gaps? So you can see how a quality assurance project can lead to something very important. I mean, so that's, I think, what was meant.
You're speaking on clinical aspect or speaking
Clinical.
on purpose? Clinical, of course, we have meetings and see the outcome of the
Meetings
patients.
won't do. It's a hot air shop. Somebody needs to do a systematic search of, say, 100 people with acute strokes. How many of them get thrombolytics? Why do they not get thrombolytics?
So we do that. We do
okay,
that
good.
on
And then why don't you publish it?
We publish. Who
Good.
told we don't publish? We
What I
publish.
mean is different questions can promote different residents and fellows. I can see you're on the defensive.
No.
but and this is not meant to put you on the...
If you allow me to speak, I will speak.
Sure.
I'm just vice dean for 1 week. I'm a professor.
Okay.
Of
Okay,
I'm
I'll ask
just
you a week later.
I'm just a fetus of vice dean material here, but I was a professor of neurology for
Sure.
8 years, and we have done enough publications for the amount of clinical work we have. And I think most of you are speaking from different areas on different ways of, where you are now. You are in a RCT and meta-analysis level, and there are people who don't know how to write a case report or anything. So it's a big spectrum of people. And then you have a huge clinical load which is not streamlined. So it's not our failure or others' failure. It's the entire system in India. It's all clinical medicine. When we went in, it's just how to finish the OPD. That's your first headache. 160 people are staying there. And then you have seen a good patient. You don't time even to collect the history properly and to follow them up, because you have just wondering to send these people off and have food. And many of us sacrifice our lunch to finish that. So that's the reality down there. And then most of the people who have come as postgraduates, they're good in clinical medicine. They don't have any exposure to any research. They don't know what is research. They are not even able to write a simple case report and publish somewhere. So this is the ground level. And there are Sachin Tendulkars, there are Dhonis there, but they are few. So they have to fight, and they overwork and publish. So this is where your reality is there. And people are not in the level of RCT. So if you want to improve the publications, it is should not be biased with RCTs. That's one level of game the senior people
Why
has to
don't we
do.
just deal with the issue of quality improvement projects right now? We'll come to the RCTs later. And you know what? A very famous philosopher once said, our job is not to describe the world. Our job is to change it. You've been describing the problems. I've been hearing it for 30 years. You're the dean now, as vice dean. So I'd like to hear from you how you can change things. So we'll come back to you, okay? So that you have a chance, 1 more week to think, and then you can answer.
No, change has already started. We have done the BMJ publication training just 1 week back.
Great.
Now ChatGPT in, so it has taken out of the language problems. So we have already tied up with BMJ, and article processing charges are waived off. So we'll see a change over time.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Let me now ask the second question. And I don't know who asked this, but it is somebody asked, why can't we host more national and international society workshops here. We've got great facilities, and apparently somebody tried to host one here, but then the SJMC, either whether it's a college or people at Closer to God, refused the use of it. I don't know why, but whoever, he or she, said it was a great opportunity lost. Because if you have a meeting here that's national and you have experts from the country coming, that'll inspire people. So Prem, or anything, want to comment on? Okay, you answer.
Refused anyone if he wants to, he or she wants to run a state level or a national or an international meeting in St. John's. And I think the management has been fairly supportive of that. I mean, you know, either giving a discount or actually waiving the charges of the hall. I think this has been going on. I don't know who, I mean, at least not, I don't know of any such instance where we have refused someone to this. I don't think so. I don't agree with that.
Okay. Well, what you're hearing from the Dean is a will to help, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Now, we'll go to the second set of questions, which is very different from the first set. Time management. Time management in research. Chitranjan alluded to it. He doesn't sleep, he doesn't eat, he doesn't sweat, he doesn't have a haircut. You know, that's one form of time management. And then how and where do you find the time to do it? And what motivates you to do research when you spend your extra time and energy and not get paid for that extra? I will answer the last question, but then I'm going to open up the questions to people here. Anura and Prem, both have been successful. The last question is, what motivates you to do research when you have to spend the extra time and energy and not get paid for it? The answer is very simple, because you want to do it. That was the only reason. You don't say, I'm going to do it if you're going to give me money. You do it. The recognition will come, the money will come. So that's the approach I would tell people about that. But so let's come on to, how do we do time management? Prem.
I think time management is the most important one of the most important factors for the individual. So far in the first set of questions, we were talking about the institution. Now we're talking about what the individual. It's difficult for me to say how one does time management, because each person's time is different, or the way each person spends their time is different. But basically, I think the principle of time management is to see what are the essential things you need to do and find time to do them. Find out the things that are not essential, prioritize so that you can push certain things away and focus on certain things. And lastly, I think delegation is very important. There are many things that we do as a routine that somebody else can do just as well, and we should not hesitate to delegate and not want to hold everything to ourselves. Can we do what Chitranjan said to the extent that he said? I admire him for it, but most people, I think, would not be able to go by that route.
Well, I don't have a problem with haircuts.
Neither do I, actually.
Anura, you want to add to that? Okay. So any comments on time management from the audience? No? Nobody? You're all brilliant at time management? No. Yes, please.
Recognize your strengths.
Right.
And work to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you waste a lot of time doing things that you're not really capable of doing.
Good point. Any other points from people?
I think it is very critical that the department should support you for time management, because somebody else has to do the round, somebody has to do duty, and then you are doing research or whatever. The department should support you. And when you have publication, the department should include all the people who did the work for you when you are doing your research. So that should be a given, that when you're doing research, the unit or the department, everybody should be included in the publication so that they get the thing. Despite the fact that, you know, there may be issues that Otherwise, why will my head of the department allow me to have protected time when I'm not getting any benefit, when I'll get all the glory?
Okay, how many of you, I hear dissenting voices, how many of you think that if you played no role in actually doing the research or writing up the paper or analyzing the data, you should be a co-author because you supported a colleague to have some time? Raise your hands. How many of you feel that should be the case? Come on, raise your hands. This is a friendly, I'll get back to you in a minute. Well, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are bold enough to raise their hands so that the professors can be contradicted. That's a good thing about St. John's. I actually disagree with you. I think the way you do that is by having different streams. A clinician is rewarded for being a good clinician. A teacher is rewarded for being a good teacher. An investigator is rewarded for being a good investigator, but they need time. And so you adjust the amount of time. Like in our institution, you have annual contracts. Like my contract, when I first came in, only 20% of my time was for clinical work. So much for teaching, so much for research. And then teaching came down to 4 lectures a year. That's all I had to do. And now it's come down to 0 lectures a year, although I do more than that. But then I get evaluated on my research productivity. So I think you have different evaluation criteria depending on the streams. Coming to credit, there is something called ICJME criteria for authorship. They're very serious stuff. If you put somebody on a paper because he's a nice guy or because he's your department head, that's a no-no. That's actually academic fraud. So please don't do that. No. And don't insist that the young person does, because the young person has no control.
No, my question was that I agree with that, that the IGACME. The question is that everybody in that unit will have some role or the other. Maybe it is reviewing the paper, or maybe you discuss across the table better study, better recruitment, and so on and so forth. So there are roles in that unit. But there may be a peripheral role, but not really a good role, but it will be part of that. But the point is that they have to support the guy who's spending 40% or 30% of his time.
I'll turn to Prem. You know, the usual way we recognize such contributions is in the appendix. We list people who've contributed but didn't play a key role in the effort. And so I think that you're right, they should be recognized, but we should recognize authorship means I'm the author of this paper. I either originated the idea, I did the actual work, I analyzed the data, I interpreted it, and what is written is my interpretation of the results. That's what authorship is. Contributors can be at the end of it. So I think that's a balanced way of doing it. And I think when you have promotions committee, contributors should get some points for that. Okay, let's then move on to, okay, I'll just tell you how I do my time management.
Can I say something?
Ranga? Yeah.
Just a brief thing. I'm speaking from outside the institution. I was in the institution at some time. But I think we should take the 2 examples of Prem and Anura were sitting on the dais there. They may say they were the heads of the institution, but they started off lower level. And they found time to do research and find the right balance and encourage. I think if this institution, St. John's, has got some research, either at the clinical level or at the preclinical level, and at all times, I think we should really give it to both of them.
Absolutely.
So I think they found the right balance. So, I mean, you can say that Prem retired, but he was an assistant professor at some time or lecturer, and Anura was similarly a lecturer in physiology. But he found time, and that's how he nurtured a whole lot of people and a generation of people who contributed to research. I think that's why I think also what's been said today by 4 or 5 of our people, the alumni, who have done very great, and including you, I think we should get the undergraduate students to listen to it, because we may just get the stars out from there who will become postgraduates. Thank you.
Well, thank you. On time management, I'll tell you what I do. 1 day a week, it could be 2 half days. You know, the first thing in the morning after my cup of coffee is research. Now, research doesn't mean writing, okay? But it could be thinking. And we heard a word around here, question. I wrote a paper in 1984, which I think is one of my best papers, with Richard Peter, my mentor, and it had just two parts to the message. Ask an important question and answer it reliably. It takes me usually 2 to 3 years to work out what the question is. You'd be surprised. It's easy to come up with, here's a question. But to make it into an important question and make it answerable takes me 2 years. Just to let you know, public confession, putting my laundry out in public, I applied to the Canadian Institutes of Health for a grant with bariatric surgery to reduce mortality and morbidity. It got turned down twice. And I'm a senior investigator, so you've got to learn. Now I just reapplied and got funded the third time. But it took me 2 years to get it. You raised the issue of grants. You're lucky if it's only 4 months. So that's good. Well, I wrote for 3 months, didn't get it. 3 months, didn't get it. So anyway, this just tells you it's the person that matters. I'll now hand over to my friend Anura to go on to the next issue. How short are we on time?
Priya is already asking us to wind up.
Okay.
So
Why
there are
don't
a few
you?
questions. Why don't you just... Okay, I'll start.
Yeah.
I'll call upon you.
Okay. There's a question here which I think could be helpful.
Then why
to
don't
us.
you ask that question?
Somebody here asked, as a junior faculty, how do you participate in collaborative research? And then how do you do effective collaborative research? And how do you establish collaboration with different research institutes? First, as a junior faculty, it's impossible to lead collaborative efforts. And you have no recognition. You don't have the experience. You don't have the stature. So don't even think about it now. Hope for it in the future. Participating in collaborative research is easy. There'll be mentors in the institution who are doing good work. Go and be an apprentice to them. Sit at their feet and say, what can I help you with? And then work through that. But it's not that you come in for a little bit. Once you take on something, do it well. I've had young people come to me. Some of them actually do a superb job, and then we include them in the papers. But they learn from it, then we help them write their grants. Some come and say, I'll do things, but they never turn up. And then when their paper gets written, they come angrily and say, why am I not on it? And my answer is, you didn't do anything. That deserves. So that's where you start. Start at the bottom. But I think mentors and deans have to be firm. You get recognized if you contribute. You don't get recognized if you don't contribute. Hand over to you, Anura.
So we have to come towards an end, so let this be the last session. And I thought it would be good to just acknowledge questions that are being asked. And one of the questions is, who will pay for my publication? And that's a constant gripe of everybody. But journals are now beginning to give free publications. If they're not open access, you can publish for free. So just hold on there. There are plans to reduce these costs. It's not going to be forever. There was a question which I asked Dr. Prem to consider. People, because George has had to go for another meeting, people ask, can every clinical department have what they call research faculty? That's a new one for me. Salim, has there been anything like a research faculty at all in a clinical department?
Not all, most do. Some very small divisions at McMaster. Departments, yes, we have the school, then we have department, then we have divisions. Department all need to have research, and every department has an associate chair for research in ours. But divisions, cardiology is a big division. A certain proportion, 20-25% are serious researchers. Another 20% are collaborating researchers, and the others are straightforward clinicians. And we respect the straightforward clinician. Small divisions like dermatology and a few others may not have clinicians, and some small divisions like immunology are largely research-based. So no hard and fast rule, but the culture is everybody tries to do research. Yeah.
Prem, in one word, can you give us an answer?
No, in one sentence.
One sentence.
The question is, can we have a research position in each department along with our designation, ? As the responsibility will make one accountable. This question is from a PhD student. So Okay. My answer was no, and my reason for saying no, my most important reason for saying no is the moment you have a research position in a department, all the other faculty will say, that's his job. And I think it will be negative for the general improvement in research in the department. At the same time, I think it's possible, and that's what when we first started the Research Institute, was that people in the Research Institute who wanted to have an attachment in the college, it should be possible for them to be given an appointment in the college, which is recognized by the Medical Council of India, giving them, this is a way of giving protected time. You say you're basically from the Research Institute, you're attached to the Department of Medicine, you can do 20% of medicine, 80% research. So that, I think, would be a better way to fly. We also have to recognize, since this is a PhD student, that to be recognized as a member of faculty, unfortunately, in India, the National Medical Council, what was the MCI, has its own requirements of what are the degrees you need and qualifications you need.
Anura, can I make... So thank you, Prem. Actually, that brings back really warm memories of you and I sitting in the old days when we were co-deans. And I want to, again, shout out to Father Kalam, because I think without an administration that truly recognizes research, eventually you can be a dean, but then there is an executive board above you that can limit the framework of research. And there was a golden time when Father Kalam was there, when he literally allowed us to do everything. So thank you, Father Kalam. I hope there was Father Charles was here. I wish he was still here. But it was a truly golden time when we had Salim, Prem, all of us working together, and Ranga, who was a facilitator. Now, I want to just focus on one question, because it has been a contentious question, and I think it is, how is St. John's designing a space for women researcher, clinician scientists? I think that is something that is a difficult one. Would anyone like to take that on? St. John's doesn't have a specific zone for women researchers as far as I know. But does anyone have any suggestions of what St. John's could do for this? Who asked this question, by the way? If you want to expand, could you give us in one line or two lines what you think St. John's could do?
Thank you so much for acknowledging the question, because what we do see is when you set about research, and it's a research continuum, it's not one point in time, it's not a snapshot, it's across time, and particularly for women, negotiating their time through family and childcare, and also care of the elderly as they get older, and being 40-something menopausal.
What would you
I'm
like?
just saying,
What would you like? Name.
what I would like is for a design that helps to understand this better, and for more women to lead, be mentors as well. Because in the previous panel, we didn't see women there. So as a design, it's nice to have mentors to look up to who've also negotiated similar spaces. What's the kind of support systems that are there? Are there designs of support systems that people know of across the globe that we could emulate here in India? It would be nice to have a compendium of that we could go back to. Thank you.
Very quickly, I think, I just wish a former dean was here, Dr. Mary Olapalli. She was a true example of how to make it in this world. But Patrick, you wanted to say something.
I'm involved in some way in this program for women researchers, and I think that has to be a division and institution priority. We make sure every faculty has mentorship, but especially women have mentorship. women with children require additional resources. So we try and provide those resources too. So the goal really is for everyone, and especially women, in 10 years to be nationally recognized in maybe one small disease or one small sphere of medicine. But that is the goal for everyone, and we try and take special care of women.
Yeah, we kind of reduce it into a problem of let's give you more time post-pregnancy, let's give you a creche. I think that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about what Patrick was talking about, which is specific aimed initiatives to create leadership among women. Thank you, Patrick. That's very nice. I hope the Dean would ask you for some examples of how to do this. Right. There are two women. How remiss of me. We have two women here, and I didn't ask. And Mary Olapalli's daughter is here, and she wants to speak after these two first.
Yeah. So I think I don't know what institute has done to promote women researchers, but having seen majority of the faculty being women within St. John's, I am assuming that there is a very pro-environment for all of us to grow. And having led a 90% women team for the last more than 10 years, I can tell you that the way we have been successful is by just being very supportive to each other and being flexible. Flexibility is the only reason why 80% of the team has stayed with us for more than 10 years and continue despite pregnancy, childbirth, postpartum, elderly, household, parents to take care, and everything else. And all of us turn up invariably 10 hours a day to work.
Thank you. You want to say anything? Just you echo what she says. But I think the point is that you're talking about the time that you're being given. But what Patrick was talking about was something very, very specific. And I think we should think. Patrick, back to you.
No, and it goes well beyond the institution. So national societies should pick women speakers. The typical thing is, they're not good speakers, but maybe they're not good speakers because they've never been given a chance to speak. So a requirement within the US societies is we have to have women speakers, we have to have young women speakers. And for those who are interested, you should read Marsha Angel's autobiography. Salim would know her. She was the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. She took 12 years off to raise her children. As a world-class researcher, she's a pathologist and became the New England Journal of Medicine editor. And she was very controversial because she was so strong in her opinion. So that should be the role model for many of you.
Anjali, can you briefly tell us?
Yes. Okay, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So actually, I just wanted to echo what Dr. Jyoti said. That was my comment, that I'm not sure how it is outside, but I think in St. John's, I don't feel that there's a difference between women and men researchers. But especially given there's evidence with us, like Dr. Shruti and me, so most of us in our group of our research fellows, out of the 5 of us, out of the 6 of us, there's only 1 male in our CRGP research. So I think that it isn't a question, I'm maybe outside, there's some sort of discrimination or no help, and a lot of us, the 4 of us, are managing through everything else that we have to deal with, the elderly, the pregnancy, childcare, whatever. So it's also important that you have somebody, it doesn't have to be, the mentor doesn't have to be a woman, it just has to be somebody who understands all of it.
Thank you. Oh, Priya, of course. We're wondering when you'd weigh in.
I agree with both the previous speakers who said that St. John's is actually a supportive environment. I think also that there are successful women researchers, several of whom are sitting in this room today. So I think what might be helpful as a suggestion is to actually form a support, like a group, a women's researcher group, to learn that there are role models actually on campus. And also, I think the solutions that can come up with maybe unique to women and we can hear different opinions. So that's my suggestion, to form a group.
Priya, you read my mind. I was unionize, women unionize, and have power, come together and have a women's research organization, association. The reason is there are some issues that are specific. It's work-life balance. It's, women are just as tough or intelligent or hardworking as men, or maybe even more. But I think there are special issues, and only women understand it, no matter how empathetic a man is. So I think having a group, and that group then makes recommendations to the dean, and through the dean, have policies. There's going to be a constant tension in this, Priya, and I have had to face it as the head of PHRI. In that, so if you give women more protected time because they've got children going through childbearing age, the men will say, I'm working much harder and I'm only taking less pay, or whatever the thing is. So it is a form of now positive discrimination in order to give women the chance. I'm not saying I agree with that view, but that is the tension you're going to have to fight. Not fight, to deal with. But I think it's a good idea to have that. So thank you. But let's now try to close the session. And I want to thank the organizers, Priya and Sucharitra. I keep on saying it wrong. Where is she? Yes. Rita. Thank you for organizing this session. How many of you enjoyed it? Raise your hands. Good. Well, all credit to the organizers for it. Yeah. And this is a start of a discussion. We're at a moment in time in St. John's trajectory. I'm not going to say history, because history can be of the present, of the past, and of the future. In the trajectory where truly our rankings drop below. We were in the top 5 for many years, and then our rankings are now close to 20. The ranking is only one reason, but I think I must say, as one of the people working with Prem and Anura in developing the research institute, I'm not as happy with the degree of interaction between the clinical faculty and other groups and the institutes. And there should probably be a retreat of people discussing some of your issues, some of the issues, to say, how can we transform it? At our place, we have a retreat every 2 years to talk about what are we doing right, what are we doing wrong. But one of the things we absolutely put emphasis on is catching those young people who are interested in research early, protecting them, mentoring them, and giving them money so that they have to do less clinical work, because in our place, salary depends on how much clinical work you do. So senior people take money out of their grants or out of their clinical billings to protect the young people. So these are all ideas you can have. But I want to thank you all for being a great audience. And again, I want to thank Father Kalam. I haven't seen you for a long time, Father. So thank you. You and Father Percy were the driving, or not, let me say, supporting key people to Prem and Anura when the institute started. And I hope we can take it to the next level with the current leadership. So thank you all.
Thank you all very much. I will bring this session to a close by asking Dr. Anura to give a memento to Dr. Jyoti and Dr. Shruti for participating and giving your wonderful suggestions. I can come to you. Yeah, no, I'll come. And Dr. Jyoti, would you mind giving a memento to Dr. Salim and Dr. Anura for really conducting such a wonderful suggestion? And thank you all also for sending in your questions on cards. We may not have been able to address every single one, but I assure you that every single question was read and will be saved as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.